The rain was merciless that night. Cold needles of water slashed across the cracked pavement of a deserted street in downtown Boston. Streetlights flickered, casting broken halos of yellow on puddles filled with reflections of a world that didn't care. Amid the downpour, a young mother named Lydia Carter, barely 28, stumbled across the sidewalk clutching a trembling little boy wrapped in a thin blue blanket. Her shoes were soaked through, her hands numb, and her eyes, those deep green eyes, were swollen from crying. The world had already turned its back on her. Tonight she was ready to do the unthinkable, not for herself, but for her child. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes one act of empathy can change a life forever. Lydia hadn't eaten for 2 days. Her son Noah was only 4 and hadn't had a real meal in almost as long. They had been living in an abandoned bus terminal since the city shelter closed for maintenance. Lydia had knocked on doors, begged for work, pleaded for help, but Boston was bitter in winter and people were colder still. The once vibrant woman who used to smile even at strangers had turned into a ghost of herself, wandering between hope and despair. She had lost her husband Ryan 2 years earlier in a construction accident. His employer had promised compensation but vanished into loopholes and silence. Since then, Lydia's world had collapsed. One eviction notice, one rejection, one empty promise at a time. And now, as Noah whimpered in her arms, whispering, "Mommy, I'm hungry," she realized that she had reached the end of her strength. She looked across the street and saw the glow of a small, 24-hour grocery store. The glass door glimmered, and inside a heater hummed. Shelves were stocked with bread, milk, fruits, things she used to buy without thinking twice. For a long minute, she stood outside the door, drenched, shaking, and broken. Then she whispered to herself, "Just one loaf. One for him." She pushed the door open. The warmth hit her like a dream. The clerk, a middle-aged man reading a magazine behind the counter, barely looked up. Lydia walked toward the bread aisle, her heart pounding with guilt and fear. She picked up a small loaf and a carton of milk, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped them. Noah was half asleep in her arms. She walked toward the door, every step heavier than the last. She didn't even make it 3 feet past the exit when a loud alarm shattered the silence. The clerk jumped up, yelling something she couldn't process. Lydia froze, clutching Noah tighter, her heart racing like a drumbeat of panic. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed across the rain-slicked road. A police car pulled up, and out stepped Officer Daniel Hayes, a man in his mid-30s with a sturdy frame and calm blue eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. He approached slowly, not with aggression, but with curiosity. The store clerk shouted, "She stole from me!" Called the cops just in time. Daniel's eyes softened as he took in the sight. This thin, soaked woman clutching a half-conscious child and a wet loaf of bread. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but Lydia couldn't even meet his eyes. She sank to her knees right there on the wet sidewalk, clutching the bread and milk like treasures. Her lips trembled as she said the words that would echo in Daniel's heart forever. "You can arrest me, but please, feed my child first." The world went silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Daniel stared at her. This woman who wasn't a criminal, but a mother trying to survive. He took a slow breath and knelt beside her, his badge gleaming under the streetlight. The clerk kept muttering angrily in the background, but Daniel barely heard him. He reached out, took the bread gently from Lydia's hand, tore off a piece and handed it to the boy. Noah opened his eyes weakly and took it. Lydia sobbed quietly as she held him. Her tears mixed with the rain, and for the first time in months, Noah smiled. A small, tired smile that broke something inside the officer. Daniel stood up, walked to the clerk, and said something that silenced the man instantly. Then, without hesitation, he pulled off his police badge and placed it on the hood of his car. The metal clinked against the wet surface. "Tonight, I'm not a cop," he murmured. "I'm just a human being." He went inside the store, paid for a bag full of food, bread, milk, fruit, soup, and came back. He knelt beside Lydia again and said, "Come on." Let's get you two somewhere warm." She didn't understand. She just nodded, too exhausted to argue. Daniel opened his car door, helped her in, and turned the heater on full blast. As they drove through the rain, Lydia kept her eyes on Noah, who was eating quietly in the back seat. Daniel glanced at them through the mirror. He had seen hundreds of arrests, crimes, and lies in his career. But tonight, something inside him was unraveling. He thought about his own past, about losing his wife and daughter in a drunk driving crash 3 years ago. He had shut off his heart since then. But now, as he looked at this mother and child, he realized what pain really looked like and what courage meant. He didn't take them to the station. Instead, he stopped at a small diner that stayed open all night. The owner, an older woman named Maggie, greeted him with surprise. "Dan? This late?" He nodded, helped Lydia and Noah inside, and said softly, "They need a meal. I'll cover it." Lydia tried to protest, whispering, "You don't have to," but Daniel shook his head. "You've done enough, ma'am. Let someone else take care of you tonight." As Noah devoured pancakes and warm milk, Lydia sat silently, her hands shaking. When she finally looked up, tears filled her eyes. "Why are you helping us?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at her for a long moment and said, "Because someone once told me that doing the right thing doesn't need permission." They sat there for hours, talking quietly. Lydia told him about Ryan, about the accident, about losing her home and job. She told him how she had gone to church every Sunday and prayed that something would change. Daniel listened, not as an officer, but as someone who had known loss. When dawn began to break, painting the windows gold, Lydia said softly, "I'll turn myself in if I have to." I just didn't want him to go hungry. Daniel looked at her, then down at his badge, still lying on the diner counter where he had set it. "There's nothing to turn yourself in for," he said. "You did what any mother would do." Over the next few days, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about them. He contacted a friend who worked at a local women's shelter, arranged a room for Lydia and Noah, and made sure they had groceries and clothes. When he visited them a week later, Noah ran up to him, holding a toy car someone had donated. "Officer Dan," he giggled. For the first time in years, Daniel laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. Weeks turned into months. Lydia found work as a caretaker at a community center. Daniel visited often, bringing little things for Noah and helping fix things around the shelter. Slowly, something beautiful grew between them. Not romance, not yet, but trust. A quiet friendship between two broken souls who had found healing in kindness. One spring afternoon, Lydia got a call from the city housing office. They had been approved for a small apartment. When she moved in, Daniel helped carry boxes up the stairs. As he placed the last one down, Lydia turned to him, her eyes glistening. "I'll never forget what you did that night," she said. Daniel smiled faintly and replied, "Just promise me you'll keep going. That's all the thanks I need." But before he left, Lydia took something from her purse, a small paper bag with the same brand of bread she had once stolen. "This time," she said softly, handing it to him, "I paid for it." Daniel's throat tightened. He took the bag, placed a hand on her shoulder, and nodded. "I know," he whispered. Months later, Lydia wrote a letter to the Boston Police Department explaining what had happened that night and how Daniel had saved not only her son, but her dignity. The story spread through the precinct, then through the city. People called it the night the badge came off. Daniel was quietly reinstated but declined promotion, saying, "I already got my reward." And every year after that, on the anniversary of that stormy night, Daniel would visit Lydia and Noah for dinner. They'd laugh, share stories, and remember how one act of kindness changed everything. Sometimes fate tests us not by what we gain, but by what we're willing to give. Lydia had given up her pride to feed her child. Daniel had given up his badge to save a stranger. And somewhere between desperation and mercy, both found redemption. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because the world needs more stories of compassion, courage, and kindness. Special request, comment below. What would you have done if you were in Officer Daniel's place that night? In a world that often looks away, may we never forget that even the smallest act of kindness can be enough to save someone's life. Sometimes all it takes is a loaf of bread and a heart willing to care.